All right, hello everybody. We're going to talk about genetic disorders today. Make sure you have a note sheet ready to go, and then you'll be expected to know these genetic disorders. It's an open note test, but I just want to make sure that you're familiar with it and that you've written everything down. Submit your note sheet when you're all done. All right, the first genetic disorder we're going to talk about is Down syndrome, and most people are familiar with Down syndrome. It's one of our most common genetic disorders, and something that a lot of people have seen. Down syndrome is caused by babies that are born with an extra 21st chromosome. We're supposed to have 46 chromosomes in our genome, and these kids have an extra 21st chromosome. If you look in the photo down below, you can see those black and white things. Those are all our chromosomes. This is one person's chromosomes. It's actually a little girl's chromosome. I can tell because there's two X chromosomes in the bottom right-hand corner. If it was a boy's chromosomes, then there would be one X and a Y, a really small Y in the right-hand corner. So this is a girl's DNA. And then they all have pairs of chromosomes, except for number 21, there's three of them. So that's called trisomy. Tri means three, and that's when you have three of a chromosome. Anytime we have the wrong number of chromosomes, it always produces some kind of a genetic disorder. In this case, it's called Down syndrome. These are some of the features that happen with Down syndrome. Obviously, there's sort of lowered mental capabilities, but also there's some physical things, some things that there are reasons why we can recognize a kid that has Down syndrome. And kids with Down syndrome, super lovable people, but just have different disadvantages. All right, let's talk about another one. This is similar to Down syndrome only in the sense that this person has the wrong number of chromosomes. Otherwise, the syndromes are very, very different. This is called Klinefelter syndrome, and these are boys because they are biological boys. We're not talking about gender here. Biologically, they're boys because they have an X and a Y chromosome. However, they have an extra X chromosome. Now, girls are normally XX and males are normally XY. So in this case, these are boys that have two X's and a Y. What that does is produce too much in their bodies. It produces too much of the female hormone called estrogen. So they're perfectly normal in every other way. Their brains function the way they want them to. Every other way, they're the same. But as they mature, so as they hit puberty, they don't develop facial hair or body hair. Their voices don't lower, and they don't have muscle tone. And unfortunately, they may also develop breasts. And that sounds funny at first, but there's nothing funny about it for a boy who hits puberty and suddenly starts developing breasts. So that's called Klinefelter syndrome. It's super underdiagnosed. We have as many as 1 in 100 births. So that means 1 or 2 boys at the high school have Klinefelters. There's no real treatment for it. We can give them male testosterone hormones to help that. And some of these boys decide to have breast reduction surgeries to kind of remove the more obvious symptoms of their syndrome. But that's Klinefelter's extra X chromosome. Okay, the next one is a similar kind of condition here. This is where these are girls who are missing one of their chromosomes. So it's called Turner syndrome, and they have only one X chromosome instead of 2 X chromosomes. Interestingly, it doesn't produce too much. There's not a whole lot that goes on. Sometimes they are shorter than average. Sometimes they have what's called a webbed neck. Now look at the neck of this girl here. Is it really dramatic, or like it sounds freaky when you hear webbed neck, but it's just a slightly wider neck than you would normally expect. There are some reports that girls with Turner syndrome have some mental retardation, but for the most part, girls with Turner syndrome do just fine. The one problem that they do have, however, is that they are infertile, so they're unable to have babies of their own. All right, next. Now we're going to talk about something that is a genetic disorder that's a lot smaller. It's just a tiny change in one gene. It's not due to an entire chromosome missing or being added. This first one's called Huntington's disease. It's a dominant trait. So if we talk about Punnett squares, you would use a capital letter to show it. And it's unfortunately always deadly. It's something that people die from 100% of the time. Symptoms don't appear until people are in their middle age. So somewhere in the 40s or 50s is when they first get their symptoms. And you can see the two brains on the photograph here. That's a normal brain on the left and a Huntington's brain on the right. They become very shriveled. The brain gets smaller. So the brain doesn't work properly. They have trouble moving their arms and legs, and eventually they can't speak or move. There is a genetic test, so you could find out as an 18-year-old whether you have Huntington's disease. Do you want to know if you have Huntington's disease or not? It's kind of a controversial. Does it make you feel super sad and like giving up if you know that you have Huntington's? So controversial. All right, again, a small change on a chromosome. This one is sickle cell anemia. This time it's a recessive trait. The only way to get it is if both parents give you the recessive trait. For a dominant trait, you just need one parent to give you the trait. So sickle cell anemia causes sickle-shaped red blood cells. So you can see one kind of in the middle of the photograph there. And then they get caught on each other. These sickle-shaped, they get caught on each other and they plug up the blood vessels, and they can cause really painful events that are called sickle events. People have to be hospitalized for them. So it says blood cells clog small blood vessels and cause pain and damage and a low blood cell count. That's why it's called an anemia. It's more common in people from warm areas of the world because, ironically, there's a mosquito-borne disease called malaria. And if you have one copy of the gene for sickle cell anemia, you're protected from the disease malaria. So people who have one copy of the gene, they're more likely to survive malaria. But then that means they pass on sickle cell anemia to their children. So we see more sickle cell anemia in people from Africa and areas of South America, just as an example. All right, the next one, phenylketonuria, is another recessive disease. It can be called PKU. It's extremely rare. However, we test for it, and they're showing you right there. As soon as a baby is born, we take a tiny little drop of blood and we check to see if they have PKU. It has to do with their diet. And if they have the wrong diet, just a normal diet like most people would have, it interferes with their brain development and they become severely affected by this particular disorder. But if they eat this very special diet, even before, like they don't even want the mom to breastfeed the baby even one time, because it can damage their brains. So as long as this person, now imagine being on a specific diet your entire life, and if you cheat at all, you have permanent brain damage. Can you imagine? Anyway, that's what happens with PKU. So each time that they get introduced to the wrong diet, it's not like suddenly their brains don't work, but there's more and more and more damage that accrues and it never gets better. So infants are tested at birth because of that. All right, the next one is called cystic fibrosis. It also is a recessive trait. Cystic fibrosis, we typically think of it as a lung disease, as too much mucus that gets made in the lungs. There's a lot more to cystic fibrosis. It actually has to do with how salt is handled in our bodies. And there's all kinds of different symptoms. It can affect the pancreas, and people with sickle cell anemia, with cystic fibrosis, their skin tastes really salty. I know that sounds funny, but like when a mom kisses their baby, they're like, my baby's really salty. That's a sign of cystic fibrosis. So initially, before we had treatments, the average life expectancy was like 12 to 16 years. And now I would say the average life expectancy with treatment well beyond even 40 years. We have special enzymes. They have to take tons and tons and tons of pills to break up the mucus in their bodies and to deal with the symptoms. But as long as they do these special treatments, they can live almost normal lifespans. So super exciting. Sickle cell anemia. All right, this next one's super sad. All of these genetic disorders are sad, but this one is particularly sad. This one's called Tay-Sachs. It's a recessive trait that's found more commonly in the Ashkenazi Jew population. So what does that mean? Those are Jews who can trace their ancestry to Eastern Europe. Now, lots and lots of us are not Jewish, but still have Jewish blood. Ancestry.com shows you all those kinds of things. But more often than not, it's families that have Jewish ancestry. So these babies, they start out normally. They're beautiful little kids, smart, bright, doing all the normal things at first. But then around 9 months to a year, they stop meeting their sort of baby goals, and they start declining and they stop meeting, and the babies that are their same age pass by them, and these kids don't do as well. The reason is that fats start collecting on the nerves of their brain, and so they start developing more and more brain damage. There is absolutely no cure for Tay Sachs, unfortunately. It's always fatal, and children usually die by the age of 5. Very, very sad. So leads to blindness, deafness, mental and physical deterioration, and eventual death. All right, next, hemophilia. You may have heard about hemophilia. It's a bleeding disorder. It's recessive and it's sex linked. What that means is that it's carried on the X chromosome. And remember that females get 2 copies of the X and males get 1 X and 1 Y. That makes it especially bad for boys. Girls, because we have 2 X chromosomes, if one of our X chromosomes is broken, we have a backup X chromosome that we can use instead. But boys, because they only have 1 X chromosome, if it's broken, like it has hemophilia, then that boy automatically has hemophilia. So that's what it means by a sex-linked trait. The blood doesn't clot properly. Left untreated, it's almost always deadly in early youth. Imagine a toddler running around and falling and hitting their head, and then they get a concussion and it bleeds inside and it never stops bleeding. Or imagine a toddler skinning their knee. Skinning their knee is probably not as bad, but it bleeds and bleeds and bleeds and it doesn't stop bleeding. So anytime they get hit, bumped, whatever, bruising, just a normal bruise for other people, that becomes a bleeding event for someone with for hemophilia that hasn't had it treated. Nowadays, we have really good treatments. In the United States, we have really good treatments, so people can lead normal, very close to normal lives who have hemophilia. All right, this one is one that everybody loves. It's called HSAN4 or SEPA. These are kids, extremely rare genetic disorder. They can feel pressure, so I can touch this little girl's face. She's actually not a little girl anymore. She's a teenager who lives in Minnesota. Anyway, she can feel pressure, so she can clap and she can stand and walk and do all these things, but she doesn't feel pain. So she doesn't have the nerve signals to feel pain. So it turns out kids with this particular disorder have an extremely shortened life expectancy, sometimes due to overheating. They don't feel hot, and so their bodies get really, really hot if they're out in the sun or they're exercising, and there's nothing in their bodies to tell them to stop overheating, and so they get too hot and they die. They can also die from infections and breaking bones. This little girl rubbed her eyes, but there was no pain. And so she kept rubbing her eyes and went completely blind in one eye. In fact, they have a glass eye in one of her eyes, and then the other eye is badly damaged. They have her in goggles to keep her from rubbing her eyes. As she got older, she didn't need to wear goggles anymore because she knew not to rub her eyes. But when they're just tiny little babies, they don't know that. She also bit through her tongue. She broke most of her teeth by chewing on things that she wasn't supposed to chew on because she didn't feel pain. All right, osteogenesis imperfecta. Osteo means bone, genesis means formation, and imperfecta means imperfect. So these are bones that have not formed correctly. It's also known as brittle bone disease. It is a dominant disorder, which means that kids only need to get 1 copy of the gene from a parent, but it's usually a random mutation. So the parent doesn't usually have it. It's just a random mutation that shows up in their egg or sperm, and then the baby has it. There are different variations of osteogenesis imperfecta. Some people are not really badly affected by it. Other people are die from it. Babies can be born, just being born, the act of passing through the vaginal canal can break bones. And so these babies come out with broken bones. Slight hits or tiny falls break bones. And so often they're terribly disfigured, as this picture shows, because of broken bones that never heal properly. All right, the next one, another sad one, progeria. This again is a random mutation. I was going to say it's recessive, but I'm not sure. I can't quote I can't say that for sure. But it leads to premature aging. So these are perfectly normal little kids. They're bright and happy and smart. Nothing wrong with them. But nothing wrong initially, but then they start getting old really, really fast. Many of them lose their hair. They develop heart problems. They develop Alzheimer's. They have arthritis. All the all the problems of being an old person, and most of them die in their early teens. And they die of old age things like strokes and heart attacks. Right now, there is no cure for progeria, although they are working on some interesting treatments for it. All right, this next one is called cutaneous or skin porphyria. My picture's in the way, but I don't think that matters. These are people who are basically, you could say they're allergic to the sun. That's not really an allergy, but the sun does an enormous amount of damage in a very short period of time. So it says they develop severe blisters, itching, and swelling of their skin when exposed to sunlight. It may also cause, the porphyria may also cause them to have red urine. And we think that this might be the source of vampire legends. So folks with cutaneous porphyria will often avoid the sun completely and then come out in the dark in order to be able to be safe. They stay away from windows and that kind of thing. And so that might be the source of where the vampire legends have come from. All right, the next one is called SCID, SCID. It stands for Severe Combined Immunodeficiency Syndrome. These are kids that are born without white blood cells, without an immune system. Sometimes you may have heard it called bubble boy disease. There was an obnoxious movie, I don't know, back in the 90s or something called Bubble Boy or something. I don't know. And yeah, it's insulting. So anyway, this is a real disease. This little boy had bubble boy disease, and he lived in a bubble until he was, boy, I'm trying to remember how old. Does it say it right here? His name was David Vetter. Anyway, he lived in this bubble until he was a teenager, I believe. Nobody could contact him, like touch him or anything, because even one germ gets to him, then he can't fight it off and he dies from it because he has no immune system to fight off any kind of disease. So then his family had another daughter, another child, and it was a daughter. And the daughter, they did a bone marrow transplant from the daughter to him. It was experimental. They thought they could cure him, but unfortunately, they didn't realize that the daughter was actually sick at the time of her transplant, of the time of the bone marrow transplant. And so they accidentally transferred some virus to David. The procedure is actually successful. It is possible to do a bone marrow transplant, and that's how we treat kids with SCID nowadays. But his immune system had not had time to develop, and the virus got to him faster than the immune system could grow, and so he ended up dying. It was a very sad story. It was all over international television. Everybody knew David Vetter and the Bubble Boy at the time when it happened. Okay, we're almost done, you guys. Neurofibromatosis I know it's kind of a scary thing to look at, but most of the time, people with neurofibromatosis have a fairly normal lifespan. Yes, these are tumors. However, they're not cancer. So they don't, I was going to say, they don't spread to other body parts. It looks like they spread everywhere, KJ. Yeah, they're just not cancer, and we'll go with that. So they're less deadly than cancer tumors would be. They're just extremely disfiguring. And this is an autosomal dominant trait. So usually a parent has this disorder, and then they pass it on to their children. All right, next is harlequin ichthyosis. This causes extremely hard, thick skin. Look at the diagram of the baby. I'm not going to show you the photos of the baby because it's quite disturbing. It's so sad. So their skin is super, super thick. So if the baby moves at all, the skin cracks. It's really hard and dry. The skin sheds 7 to 10 times faster than normal. So they're building up skin cells 7 to 10 times faster than normal. So Ryan Gonzalez is the boy in the middle here who has harlequin ichthyosis. And it says here, because his skin is constantly shedding, he needs to consume 7,500 calories a day. Most boys his size would be consuming 2,000 to 2,200 calories a day. So he tube feeds himself during the night. So he actually runs a tube up his nose and down his throat and into his stomach. And then he has a machine that pumps protein into his body because he can't eat enough to feed his constantly growing skin. I know that sounds crazy, but cell division, which is what making the skin, requires so much energy that he has to eat a lot of extra stuff. All right, this last one, it's not actually on your notes. Students often ask me about this. Conjoined twins, it's not actually due to a mutation. It happens when a fertilized egg divides incompletely, or if two babies as eggs, so two fertilized eggs, land on top of each other and then start growing together. There's many different types of conjoined twins. These two men are Eng and something Chang, I forget their last names. Anyway, they are from Siam, which is in Asia. And so you may have heard the term Siamese twins. That's comes after these two men. They were sort of a circus act. They joined the circus and were literally a freak show in the circus. They were just attached by a tiny flap of skin at their abdomen, which nowadays a surgeon would have just cut in a split second and they would have been just fine. But nobody ever cut them, and they spent the rest of their lives attached together. And then some of you may have seen Abby and Brittany Hensel. They live in the Twin Cities. They went to Bethel College, and you might see them around. I'm not sure if they're living here in the Twin Cities, but they had a TV show for a while also. So these girls they basically have one body. They have two legs and two arms, but two heads. And then the girl on the left controls the right side of the body, and the girl on the right controls the left side of the body. But that's not a genetic disorder because it has nothing to do with their DNA. It has to do with the eggs either splitting incorrectly into two identical twins or two different babies coming together in the uterus and kind of melding into one baby. All right, that's it, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Let me know if you have any questions.